She was a trailblazer, the first American woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest without using supplemental oxygen. But just hours after her historic triumph, she vanished into the death zone. For 9 long years, her story remained frozen in time until one British climber made a decision no one else dared. What he discovered and what he chose to do next changed everything we thought we knew about her journey. Frances Arsentive had so much to live for. At 40, she was already a highly accomplished mountaineer, known for her radiant smile and relentless ambition. Her greatest joy in life was her son, Paul, and her husband, Sergei, a legendary Russian climber, famously nicknamed the Snow Leopard, who shared her deep love for conquering the world's most perilous peaks. But there was one dream that burned brighter than the rest: to become the first American woman to summit Everest without bottled oxygen. It was a goal many had died chasing, a feat that pushed even the strongest human bodies beyond their natural limits. As she packed for her final expedition, Frances left a simple note for her son. It included a hand-drawn map of her route to the Himalayas. "Hi, Paul. We're at base camp. Miss you and love you, Mom." She had no idea that 9 years later, a British climber would come face to face with her legacy and take a step that would rewrite history. On May 17, 1998, Everest Base Camp was buzzing with energy. Dozens of climbers prepared for their summit bids using Sherpas, oxygen tanks, and high-tech communications. But Frances and Sergei Arsentive stood apart from the rest. They climbed alone, no oxygen, no Sherpa support, and no radios. Their approach wasn't careless. It was a calculated risk taken by two of the most experienced high-altitude climbers in the world. Sergei had earned his Snow Leopard title by summiting the 5 highest peaks in the former Soviet Union and had even traversed all 3 summits of Kanchenjunga in a single climb, a challenge that few elite climbers would even attempt. But even the most seasoned mountaineers can underestimate Everest. And for Frances, it would become a lesson written in ice. Their journey had already tested every boundary of human endurance. On May 20th, Frances and Sergei made their first summit attempt, but it failed before it even truly began. Their headlamps failed near the first step, one of Everest's key landmarks in the final ascent. Without light, navigating the dangerous terrain at night was suicide. They turned back, forced to retreat into the darkness back to camp, their hope dimming with every step. But they weren't ready to give up. On May 21st, they tried again. This time, they managed to climb about 50 meters, but exhaustion and altitude forced them to turn around. Once more, each failed attempt wasn't just a setback, it was a gamble with death. Every additional hour spent above 8,000 meters pushed their bodies closer to collapse. In the death zone, the air holds only a third of the oxygen found at sea level. The human body, exposed long to these conditions, begins to shut down, organs weaken, thinking becomes clouded, muscles deteriorate. By May 22nd, the couple had already spent 3 full nights in that realm, nights filled with howling wind, bone-freezing temperatures, and the creeping shadow of mortality. For most climbers, this would have been the moment to descend, to accept that the mountain had won. But Frances Arsentive wasn't most climbers. Her goal of becoming the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen had become more than a dream. It was an obsession. Despite the toll on her body, despite every warning sign, she pushed forward. At 1 a.m. on May 22nd, in temperatures so brutal they could freeze bare flesh in seconds, Frances and Sergei set out once again. Moving slowly, carefully, with every breath a struggle, they ascended into the darkness. No oxygen, no radio, no backup, just grit, love, and the pull of a summit that had claimed countless lives before them. What they didn't realize was that this would be the climb that separated them forever. This decision, made in silence and desperation, would echo across history, birthing a legend and a tragedy. As the sun rose over the Himalayas, the tiny figures could be seen still climbing, long past the safe window for descent. It was a fatal miscalculation. On Everest, timing is everything. Climbers are taught that the summit is never the finish line. It's only the halfway point. Those who ignore this rule often never return. But Frances and Sergei kept going. Late in the afternoon, against all odds, Frances Arsentive reached the top of the world. She had done it. She stood on the summit of Mount Everest, the first American woman to do so without supplemental oxygen. It should have been the most triumphant moment of her life, but there was no celebration. No euphoria, only crushing fatigue. Her body was shutting down. Her limbs moved stiffly, as though no longer under her control. Her speech was slurred, her eyes dazed. Frances Arsenti was still alive, but just barely. When a team of Uzbek climbers stumbled upon her near the summit of Everest, they were stunned. She was critically ill, her body ravaged by the freezing altitude, but miraculously breathing. They found her motionless, clipped to a fixed rope, clearly in distress, but still conscious. Her condition was dire. She was suffering from severe oxygen deprivation and advanced frostbite, but there was a faint, flickering will to live left in her eyes. The Uzbek climbers, despite their own exhaustion and the lack of Sherpa support, acted immediately. They shared their precious oxygen, the last bit they had. They spoke to her, tried to encourage her, attempted to help her move. But Everest is cruel. Their supplies were limited, their strength fading, and time was running out. After doing all they could, they were forced to make a devastating choice, one no climber ever wants to make. They had to descend, or they would not survive either. Before leaving, they clipped her securely to the mountain's fixed rope to prevent her from sliding down the deadly slope. It was a small act of dignity and hope, a decision that would unknowingly shape the fate of others and leave a lasting legacy of compassion on Everest's unforgiving slopes. That same evening, as they carefully made their way back down the mountain in the dark, the Uzbek climbers encountered someone still climbing upward. It was Sergei Arsentiev, France's husband. Alone, breathless, and determined, he moved through the darkness with an oxygen tank and supplies, desperately searching for the woman he loved. The climbers informed him of her location. He said nothing more. He kept climbing into the cold, black silence of the death zone. That was the last time anyone would ever see Sergei alive. What happened after that moment remains one of Everest's deepest mysteries. Did he reach her in time? Did he hold her hand? Did they speak one last time? Alone on the side of the world's highest peak, no one knows. What is certain is that his body was never found. But what was discovered in the days that followed would reveal a profound tale of love, sacrifice, heartbreak that has haunted the mountaineering world ever since. 2 days later, on May 24, 1998, a new climbing team was ascending the mountain. British mountaineer Ian Woodall and South African climber Kathy O'Dowd were just 300 meters from the summit when Kathy noticed something unusual. A flash of purple fabric fluttering in the wind, a faint movement, unnatural, fragile. It wasn't snow or rock. That body's alive, Kathy said suddenly, her voice strained with disbelief. She moved closer to investigate. What she saw would remain etched into her memory forever. There, twisted in a painfully unnatural position and clipped to the fixed line, lay a woman. Her skin was bone-white and glassy, almost like porcelain, a sign of extreme frostbite. She looked like a frozen doll. Her long black hair fell around her face, which still carried the echo of beauty despite the ravages of Everest's icy cruelty. Then, shockingly, the woman's eyes opened, her lips trembled, and in a whisper that barely escaped the wind, she said, "Don't leave me. Don't leave me here to die." Kathy froze, the voice, the face, the pleading. It was like looking into a mirror of what could be her own fate. They were the same age, similar features. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. Then the woman spoke again. "I am an American." And that's when it all clicked. It was Frances Arsentiev. Just days earlier, Kathy and Ian had shared tea and stories with Frances in their base camp tent. She had talked about her son, Paul, back home, her warm smile, her gentle laughter. It was all so recent, and now, here she was, dying before their eyes, calling out not just for help, but for her life. Ian arrived with the rest of their team, including Sherpas. They searched the area, hoping to find Sergei, hoping he had somehow survived. They found his ice axe and they found his rope, but Sergei was gone. No sign of his body, only the faint remains of a man who had risked everything for love. Beside Frances lay the empty oxygen tank the Uzbek climbers had left. Her down gloves were scattered on the ice, a chilling indicator of hypothermic delirium. Victims often experience a sudden, false sensation of warmth as their bodies shut down, prompting them to remove essential clothing. For over an hour, Ian, Kathy, and their team tried everything they could to save her. They attempted to lift her into a sitting position, but she was completely limp. Her limbs wouldn't move. She had no control over her body. They tried sliding her arms into her jacket sleeves, but her muscles wouldn't respond. When they attempted to make her stand, her legs collapsed under her like wet fabric. Ian knelt beside her, staring into her hollow, frostbitten face. "If you can help us, we can try to move you down the mountain," he told her gently, trying to hold her gaze. "But if you can't, you're going to die." There was no response, no strength left in her to fight, just silence. The kind of silence only Everest can command. Final, frozen, absolute. Frances Arcenti was still conscious, but her mind was already gone. Her body remained alive, breathing faintly in the thin air, but Everest had already taken her mind. Long before it would take her life, she drifted in and out of awareness, not fully understanding what was happening. The rescue team that had discovered her, standing with her for over an hour in freezing temperatures of -30°C, began to suffer the brutal consequences of their own heroism. Frostbite crept into their hands and feet. Time was no longer on anyone's side. They faced a cruel and impossible choice: attempt a rescue that would likely cost all their lives, or leave a conscious woman to die alone on the mountain. It was a decision no human being should ever have to make. In her fog of oxygen-starved confusion, Frances asked a heart-wrenching question. "Why are you doing this to me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible against the wind. She couldn't understand that these strangers were trying to save her. Her mind, twisted by hypoxia and trauma, perceived them not as rescuers, but as tormentors. The climbers had no words to offer in response. Even the Uzbek team that had reached her the day before had made the same painful conclusion. She was simply too far gone to save. Her body was shutting down, and any attempt to move her would have resulted in more death. As they prepared to leave, Frances stopped speaking. Her head drooped. She sank slowly into unconsciousness. Kathy O'Dowd, one of the climbers, would later recall that moment with quiet devastation. "I climb because I enjoy it," she said. "But after finding Frances, there was no way reaching the top could have brought me any joy." They left her where she was, still clipped to the guide rope, still alive. It was the last time anyone would see her breathing. Yet this was not the end of her story. In fact, it was only the beginning of Everest's most haunting chapter. Frances Arcenti died on May 24, 1998, alone, suspended high above the clouds on the north side of the world's tallest mountain. She had become the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen, but she had paid for that honor with her life. Her body remained there, a tragic and frozen reminder of the mountain's price, but the fate of her husband, Sergei Arsentiv, remained a mystery. The last time anyone saw him was on May 23rd, when the Uzbek climbers passed him climbing upward in darkness, carrying oxygen and medicine in a desperate attempt to save his wife. After that, he vanished. No one ever saw him again. Yet his gear, his ice axe, and his rope were later found lying beside Frances. They offered a silent clue that he had reached her, but where had he gone? How had he died? And why was his body never found? These unanswered questions tormented everyone who knew their story. Back in Colorado, their 10-year-old son Paul waited, clinging to hope. All he had left from his mother was her final letter, a cheerful message sent from base camp with a hand-drawn map of her journey. That letter, once filled with excitement and love, had become a heartbreaking relic of dreams turned into nightmares. And still, Frances remained there, long after death. Her body, visible from the main route up the north side of Everest, became an eerie landmark. Climbers on that path could not avoid her, dressed in a purple jacket, with her dark hair gently spread around her face. She lay peacefully in the snow, as if asleep. To many, she looked like something from a frozen fairy tale. They began to call her Sleeping Beauty. Season after season, climbers passed her resting place. Some paused, whispering prayers or offering a silent moment of respect. Others turned away, disturbed by the sight. A few took photos, morbid trophies that would later spread across the internet. She became more than a body. She became a reference point. Climbers gave directions using the dead. After the man in green boots, "You'll pass the woman in purple," they would say. Frances Arcenti had reached the top of the world, but in doing so, she became a symbol of Everest's cruel duality, the beauty of human ambition and the unbearable cost that often follows. For nearly a decade, Frances Arcenti's body remained where she had died, high on Mount Everest, exposed to the elements and to the passing gaze of every climber ascending from the north side. She became not just a memory, but a macabre landmark. Climbers gave Directions using her as a reference. Turn left at the woman in the purple jacket. There was no dignity in it, only cold. Practical reality in a place where death is part of the landscape. The cost of recovering a body from that altitude ranged between $40,000 and $100,000, and the risks involved were extreme. Technically, it was a nightmare. Ethically, it was complicated. Who bore the responsibility to act? Who even had the right? And so, for 9 long years, Frances remained frozen in time, a symbol of human aspiration and the mountain's indifference. Thousands of climbers saw her. Hundreds passed within feet of her, but no one intervened. That is, until 2007, when one man, burdened by guilt and haunted by a promise, decided that enough was enough. That man was Ian Woodall, the British climber who had once held Frances's hand as she lay dying. In 1998, he had stayed with her, listened to her fading words, "Don't leave me here to die," and then, because he had no other choice, walked away for years. He carried the weight of that decision. Now, almost a decade later, he was returning, not for the summit, not for glory, but to honor the woman whose final plea he had never forgotten. What Woodall planned to do was unprecedented, dangerous, yes, logistically daunting, certainly, but to him, it was essential. He organized an expedition called the Mount Everest, and its mission was unique in the history of mountaineering. Woodall and his team would return to that unforgiving height, over 8,500 meters, with one goal: to give Frances the dignity in death she had long been denied. Moving a frozen body at that altitude was no ordinary task. It required extraordinary strength, precise weather conditions, and total commitment. One misstep could endanger every member of the team. Yet, Woodall's resolve was absolute, and it wasn't just Frances who motivated him. In 1999, a year after Frances's death, American climber Jake Norton, part of the Mallory and Irvine research expedition, discovered the body of Sergei Arsenyev. His remains lay lower on the mountain, suggesting he had fallen to his death during a desperate attempt to rescue his wife. All evidence indicated that Sergei had reached Frances. After the Uzbek team left her, his rope and ice axe were found beside her body, signs that he had tried to move her, to save her. But the effort proved fatal. The snow leopard had died trying to bring his wife down from the mountain, and Frances, the week to follow, remained where he left her, alone. Their story, once thought complete, now unfolded as a quiet tragedy of love, sacrifice, and unbearable loss. Sergei's final act of devotion had gone unseen, unrecorded, until now. As Woodall and his team set up base camp in 2007, he shared the motivation behind the mission. "I had always hoped someone would eventually do something for her," he said. "But the only people who get that high are focused on reaching the summit or getting down alive. No one can stop for hours to move a body. It needed a dedicated mission, and this was that mission." The journey to her location would take days. The physical work of shifting her body, encased in ice, at a point where oxygen was nearly non-existent, would be exhausting. The margin for error was razor thin. The weather window was dangerously narrow. One storm could strand the team in the same deadly zone that had claimed Frances and Sergei. But despite all odds, they pressed on. After 9 years of silence, one of Everest's most haunting stories was about to find its final chapter. The death zone is a place where hope rarely survives. It is a realm above 8,000 meters where even the strongest bodies begin to shut down, and rescue is almost always impossible. But Ian Woodall had made a silent promise 9 years earlier, one forged in heartbreak. As he walked away from Frances Arsenyev, leaving her alone to die on the mountain, he couldn't save her then, but in his heart, he vowed that one day he would return, not to climb, not for glory, but to restore her dignity in death. That promise was fulfilled on May 23rd, 2007, exactly 9 years to the day since Frances had whispered her final words to another human being. Ian stood once again beside her body, just as he had in 1998. Time had barely touched her. The freezing Himalayan air and bone-deep cold had preserved her perfectly, like a snapshot frozen in history. Her purple jacket still glowed against the lifeless rock. Her long dark hair still curled gently round her face. She still looked asleep, but this time she would not be left behind. Woodall and his team had carried with them an American flag, and something far heavier: 9 years of sorrow, memory, and resolve. At 8,500 meters above sea level, they held a quiet but powerful ceremony. They draped the flag across Frances's body and offered a prayer. For the first time in nearly a decade, she was seen not as a grim marker on a route to the summit, but as a human being, a mother, a wife, a climber, a soul who had dared greatly and paid the ultimate price. The work that followed was grueling. Moving a frozen body at that altitude pushed human endurance to the edge. Every motion was deliberate and exhausting, every breath hard-won in the thin air. But they didn't stop. They moved her carefully, respectfully, slowly lowering her to a place where passing climbers would no longer see her, where she could rest, at last, in peace. They built a simple cairn of rocks to mark her final resting place, the only kind of burial possible. On the unforgiving slopes of Everest, for the first time since 1998, climbers on Everest's north route would not pass. The Sleeping Beauty. She had finally been laid to rest with dignity, reflecting later. Woodall called it his final expedition, so I thought it would be fitting to give something back. He said, but this mission wasn't just about moving a body, it was about honoring the love, sacrifice, and humanity behind a tragedy that had long haunted the mountaineering world. Frances Arsentive had achieved her dream, to become the first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen. But that dream came at the highest possible cost, and her husband, Sergei, could have saved himself, but instead, he chose to die trying to save her. His love, his sacrifice, remained unseen but never forgotten. And for Ian, the man who had carried that final conversation with Frances in his heart for 9 years, this mission was a way to transform tragedy into meaning. Today, Paul Di Stefano, the little boy who kissed his mother goodbye in 1998, is a grown man. He lives not only with the memory of her final letter and her brave climb, but also with the knowledge that strangers risked their lives to ensure she was honored, that she was seen, that she was loved even in death. Frances Arsentive's story is one of both triumph and heartbreak. It reminds us that the greatest human achievements often demand the greatest sacrifices, that love can drive people to attempt the impossible, and that even in the world's harshest places, compassion can endure. She vanished from Everest in 1998, but in 2007, a man returned to prove that promises matter, that dignity matters, and that sometimes the best of humanity can still rise, even in the thin, unforgiving air above the clouds. Ian Woodall didn't just keep a promise. He gave the Sleeping Beauty something more precious than any summit ever could. He gave her peace.